But basically, people in various chats on Reddit and CISO groups were talking about, hey, all of my Windows machines have gone blue screen of death, and it says that there's something wrong with CrowdStrike. And basically, what we found out is that CrowdStrike pushed an update to its Falcon sensor, which is the EDR sensor that sits on the endpoints, and that caused that blue screen of death scenario on at least 8.5 million Windows machines.
By now, everybody has seen the news. You turn on the news, you look at your social media accounts, and you're reading about airport shutdowns, delayed flights, canceled flights, trains are not moving, you can't do rental cars. I mean, for a while there, everything was pretty much shut down or severely delayed, and it was all due to a software update, or was it? We don't really know yet, but we're going to find out a little bit more about that IT outage that we experienced not a few weeks ago. And joining the MSPZone yet again is our good friend Shannon Wilkinson from Tego Cyber to make some sense of all the stuff that's happening. Shannon, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Charles. Thanks for having me again.
Okay, so we're, of course, talking about CrowdStrike. And as they, mount up for some legal issues with Delta Airlines and probably a long list of potential plaintiffs, I would be very curious to hear if you want to get technical, feel free, but what do we know about what happened? Could you just give us an overview?
Yeah. And of course, being on the Pacific coast, this happened around 9 o'clock at night, not in the middle of the night. So we started getting pings around, I think it was about around 10 o'clock at night. From news reports, I see that it actually started around 9 p.m. Pacific. But basically, people in various chats on Reddit and CISO groups were talking about, hey, all of my Windows machines have gone blue screen of death, and it says that there's something wrong with CrowdStrike. And basically, what we found out is that CrowdStrike pushed an update to its Falcon sensor, which is the EDR sensor that sits on the endpoints, and that caused that blue screen of death scenario on at least 8.5 million Windows machines. Linux, Macs, those type of machines weren't affected. But as you mentioned, flight cancellations, just on that between Thursday night and Friday morning, there are at least about 1,000 flight cancellations. Of course, the biggest one being Delta Airlines, which just finished its recovery after about a week. But Delta has come out, the CEO came out, I think yesterday, and said they had to physically touch 40,000 servers that went blue screen of death, and that took a week for them to go through. Another organization I know had about 1,000 servers go blue screen of death, and it took their team about 10 hours to run around and physically touch each of those machines. And that was the challenge of recovery for this, was that once a machine goes to blue screen of death, that computer is basically no longer accessible. So remote management tools, automatic updates no longer work, and because the machine is in an error state, so they have to be physically accessed. And even for cloud servers, that presented more of a challenge in order to try to boot those into safe mode, so that bad CrowdStrike file could be renamed or removed. But for the technical aspect, CrowdStrike maintains that it followed its normal testing procedure for the update, but then came out and said our testing tool kind of allowed for some bad content data to go to the sensor, and that's what caused the crash. So there was something known as a null pointer reference, I believe, that basically told the sensor to go to a certain location, and that location had no information. So then the Windows computers went into an error state. There's been a little bit of back and forth between CrowdStrike and Microsoft on who is kind of responsible for that. CrowdStrike has pledged that they're going to do better testing going forward. But this has also raised some questions about, is there a problem with the MDR or the EDR solutions being embedded in the kernel? And it's kind of a hot debate because there's really strong opinions on both sides. Of course, one being what we saw with the CrowdStrike update. The problem with embedding code in the kernel is if there's a bad update, like in CrowdStrike's case, can cause the entire computer to become inoperable. But on the upside, from what I understand, on the other side of the argument is that embedding the code in the kernel allows CrowdStrike to achieve some of its advanced capabilities in defending the endpoint. So, kind of.
Well, we're going to get to. I'm curious to get your view on the kernel, no kernel issue, because I've also read a lot about that.
Mm-hmm.
But can we say at this point that observably something went wrong? I mean, obviously, the world saw stuff go wrong by sitting in an airport, like in Las Vegas airport, like for 48 hours plus.
Yeah,
that the world knows something technical went wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Updates are not new. Certainly in managed services, in the MSP space, updates have been with us for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
Are you leaning? Do you think that your colleagues are leaning towards this was an update and process or procedure failure versus technical?
Yeah,
Too soon?
exactly. So it's a bit of that idea that it was a process failure, and even CrowdStrike said, yeah, our testing tool did not account for this bad content data, so we'll do better. But I guess maybe it's one of those things too, where we're relying on technology to validate our code, and we're no longer kind of doing that human-guided testing where we double check and make sure that everything is okay before we push an update. So I am sure, going forward, there's going to be, maybe that secondary, even third check to make sure that this type of situation doesn't happen again. Because, this was basically, if you think about it, this is a completely unplanned tabletop exercise for the world.
Right.
This is like, what do I do when I no longer have access to my technology, and how does my business continue to function? And from the MSPs, hey, what do I do when, the entire technology stack that I've recommended to my customers fails? How do I service my customers? How do I have enough people to go around and take care of all my customers all at once?
Yeah. I mean, I think we can all probably agree that EDR, MDR style technology is still very much needed. And this is not don't use EDR again, because I think that would be the wrong takeaway. But
for sure.
I can't imagine that there aren't organizations all over saying to themselves or to their MSP, should we be rethinking our EDR vendor partnerships? I mean, logical, right?
No, absolutely. And I don't agree, throwing out your EDR and MDR because of the situation is kind of like throwing out your car alarm because somebody breaks a window and steals the bag you left sitting on your seat in the car. What I think probably will happen, like you said, people will start questioning those relationships of, if they're CrowdStrike customers, do I want to continue being a CrowdStrike customer, or do I want to look at other solutions? But with those other solutions, hey, am I going to be in the same boat? So I think there'll be maybe some additional questions in, let's say, third-party risk questionnaires. Hey, do you touch the kernel when you update your software on my endpoints? And what will happen if you have a bad update and stuff like that? For the MSPs, one of the things that I was thinking of too was, what questioning the MSPs, like what kind of coverage or protection do you have as well in that you're recommending? Maybe you've recommended CrowdStrike to your customers. Well, do you have some sort of legal coverage that protects you from your customers coming and saying, hey, you recommended software that caused my computer systems to crash, and now I'm going to hold you accountable, and I'm going to file a lawsuit against you because my computers, went offline and stuff like that. So that's a big question, I think, from the MSP's point of view, that we might want to consider in the future of like.
No doubt. Yeah.
What happens?
I just talked to a group of MSPs yesterday, and a number of them had exposure to CrowdStrike, and other than they're very tired because they've been doing a lot of restoration of
Hmm.
out of band, out of commission machines. Surprisingly, unlike previous cyber attacks, including those that impacted MSP specific tools, I was worried that there would be blowback on the
Hmm.
MSP community. And from the MSPs I've talked to so far, there seems to be a surprising uh, understanding and
Hmm.
even thankfulness of the MSP helping them get back online and understanding that it wasn't the MSP's fault. And
Right.
I don't know, maybe it was because people were stuck in airports and they saw this play out on news and
Hmm.
just everyday, social media outlets, that they understood this was not an MSP isolated issue.
Right.
Does that make sense? Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. I mean, this is a global issue, and it was widely covered on the news,
Yeah.
which probably helped. This isn't a single, like, isolated cyber attack against an individual organization. It crossed basically all industries, from the airlines to healthcare to, schools, government facilities. So it was everywhere.
Um, I had a quick question. You briefly mentioned it in the beginning about the recovery aspect.
Hmm.
The out of band, right? Like Intel used to have, I forgot the name of the vPro, right?
Hmm.
I think they have it for servers, but I know they have it for desktops and laptops. Out of band management. In your opinion, I mean, this was something that you physically had to be at the device, at the server, to gain access and to remediate and fix this problem. This was not at
Pretty much.
all solved by remote access technologies, correct?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I know Microsoft released an update as well where you could run around with a little USB stick and plug it in and it would do its magic. But still, you had to run around to each computer physically and plug in that USB stick. And like I said, with the computers that were in the cloud, booting to safe mode with those computers being in blue screen of death was not exactly an easy process because you don't have the ability to physically touch those machines.
I mean, knowing how MSPs operate on a one to many basis, and therefore using remote or logical access technologies to accomplish that
Hmm.
efficiency and scalability, do you back to the kernel no kernel debate? Do you think this weighs more heavily towards vendors being selected for their no kernel approach? Just because if this ever happens again, let's assume that it's likely that it would, maybe not from CrowdStrike, but from another kernel vendor,
Hmm.
that MSPs might say, "Hey, let's choose a different technology approach so this doesn't happen to us. And if it does, we can recover faster."
Yeah, I think it definitely is going to be a consideration. And like I said, in those third party risk assessments, that's probably going to be a question of, hey, does your software touch the kernel? And you might weigh, if you're a customer, kernel versus no kernel software packages. So definitely, I think it's going to be a consideration going forward. Believe it or not, in researching this, Microsoft kept very tight control over the kernel and who had access to the kernel and can touch it up until Windows XP. And then after Windows XP, they kind of opened it up because more and more software vendors were wanting to develop on top of their Windows platform and stuff. So then they basically, I think, created guidelines of, like, if you're a software vendor, here is how you should properly access the kernel and stuff like that. And CrowdStrike maintains that they followed Microsoft's guidance for how they were supposed to interact with the kernel. But again, something failed in their testing process, and we
I
had the
know
blue
you
screen of
don't work.
death.
I know you don't work for Microsoft, but you have to have an opinion on. Do you think Microsoft right now is really rethinking who they let into their, ecosystem and how deep they let them go after this
Yeah, I,
incident?
I think so, because there has been a little bit of the back and forth blame game of, hey, this was CrowdStrike's fault. And then it was like, no, Microsoft should have had more control, over what people are doing in the kernel, because this blue screen of death situation could occur. So I think Microsoft will definitely start taking a look at how vendors are touching, basically it's the foundation of the operating system. So
Yeah,
if you break something in the foundation, you're you're kind of in trouble.
yeah, and it doesn't mean, again, I don't think anyone's attributing I haven't seen any attribution that this was intentional, right?
No,
Maybe
no.
negligent, maybe just honestly by mistake.
Hmm.
Maybe they followed their process, but the process wasn't good enough. I don't know
Yeah,
yet what that will yield, but I, I, I do want to talk about maybe from a security standpoint, after this incident happened, was it late Thursday? It was on a
yeah. It was
Thursday night, right?
Thursday night going into Friday morning.
At least Delta, and I think many other, I personally witnessed, some retail shops that were
Hmm.
on the phone with tech support,
Yeah.
manually getting, this is what you do, stick this, USB
Hmm.
here, do this, just to try to get them back online. Are you worried about subsequent attacks that happened or may still be happening as a result of a known outage of all of these systems impacted by CrowdStrike that are offline or in vulnerable states?
Hmm.
What do we do about that? Is that real, first of all?
Well, so any machines that are still in blue screen of death, there are all sorts of memes out there. Is like you can't hack a brick. So those machines kind of are protected because they're in that error state. Um, but the cyber criminals have been taking advantage of this situation. So they've set up all sorts of tech support scam websites, all sorts of lookalike domains, all sorts of kind of bad information online where they're trying to take advantage of the situation, and people who might not have a lot of technical expertise, maybe don't have an MSP to rely on to help them recover their systems, and now are, just scrambling to try to figure out how to get back online. So there's definitely, whenever there's natural disasters or, armed conflicts and stuff like that, the cyber criminals swarm to that because they know that's what has everybody's attention. And it's kind of easy to victimize people when these type of things are going on.
I hadn't thought about that. Mimicking the technical first responders is what you're
Exactly.
describing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there were all sorts of, CrowdStrike, bluescreenofdeath.com, all sorts of like scammy domains that popped up as this incident was occurring.
That sounds like a Mission Impossible movie right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone's writing them,
Exactly.
I'm sure. Um, so, in terms of what you guys do, and for those that don't know Tego Cyber, I mean, maybe give us a quick rundown on what you guys do. But what have you guys seen? I mean, you picked this up. It sounds like were you monitoring this, and did you get any type of early warning other than from like Reddit or from the other offline sources?
So no early warning. We found out about it about the same time the rest of the world did when everything stopped working. But from a monitoring perspective, background on Tego Cyber, we're a threat intelligence and threat detection company. So the thing that we picked up on, of course, are all those like scam domains and stuff like that. So those are part of our threat intelligence feeds to try to protect our customers of, hey, you're talking to a scam website. This is not really anybody that's going to help you with CrowdStrike. So that's where we got involved, but also just talking to people and trying to help them, because I think in these situations also the cybersecurity and the IT community comes together, and all of us have our hair on fire at the same time, and we're just trying to help people recover and get back to normal. And then after a week of no sleep or whatever, we'll get together for a beer and reminisce and talk about the terrible week we've had.
Well,
I think.
I'm sure there will be lots of beers poured and consumed at Black Hat
Oh,
in Las
100%.
Vegas and DEF
Yeah.
CON. They're going to be, I'm sure, just all over this CrowdStrike issue.
Oh, yeah.
I'm really not surprised, but it's very interesting to hear that you were picking up not necessarily just the outages, but the scams that were standing up immediately. I mean, was that pretty quick after the outage started that you
Oh, yeah.
started to pick that up?
Yeah, the cyber criminals don't waste any time at all.
I mean, you shouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised, but it's really amazing how fast they respond to this
Well,
stuff.
yeah, exactly. And, we saw now, of course, hindsight's 2020, but like through the COVID pandemic and stuff like that, what cyber criminals did during COVID to try to sell fake protective gear or raise money for the Red Cross and stuff like that. I think the FBI estimated that there was like a 600% spike in COVID related scams during the pandemic. So they don't, I guess, cyber criminals never waste a good crisis.
Probably true. Probably true. What lessons can we learn? Obviously, vendor due diligence, vendor monitoring and management, especially by MSPs. But I mean, I think that I know for a fact that a number of MSPs have reported their customers coming to them and saying, especially the ones that were impacted, but were recovered by their MSP. They're asking questions like, "Do you still have faith in them?" And for the CrowdStrike partners, they're saying, yeah, let's stick with them, because I think the analogy is like lightning is not going to strike twice in the same spot. We're probably pretty good for the next year. They're not going to make that mistake twice.
Right, exactly. We hope. Fingers crossed.
we hope, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But what type of advice or anything learned did we get from this?
Well, I think, like I said, this was the tabletop exercise that nobody planned for. So, I think now MSPs and organizations are going to be asking, that question of what are we going to do? What needs to change? What processes do we need to put in place in case this ever happens again? But also, for MSPs that are providing these services, maybe if you are a CrowdStrike shop, maybe have an alternative that you're able to support in case people are just like, no, don't want to deal with CrowdStrike. I don't, I've lost faith, or I'm scared because they're touching the kernel. Are there alternatives? I know I've seen some news that there's alternatives out there besides CrowdStrike that don't touch the kernel and stuff like that. But so are you able to offer two different solutions for customers that are a little scared or shy of CrowdStrike right now?
Makes sense, right? And I mean, no one's bashed. I mean, CrowdStrike has done and continues to do good work.
Yeah.
I don't want to bash a company just because they had
it happened. Well, I mean, honestly, how many outages and stuff like that does Microsoft have? And people aren't like pitchforks and torches saying I'm going to Mac. But
point taken. But besides redundant security, MDR, EDR technology approach, which I think is prudent, there isn't anything. Could the MSPs have done anything unique on the recovery side, like creating out of band options to recover from this? I don't even know if that's realistic given how this played out.
Yeah, not really. I mean, I spoke to some of the local news stations here in Las Vegas, and they said, what could we have done to prevent this? And I'm kind of like, well, you could turn off automatic updates, but you don't want to do that, right? There's a reason why we have it keeps us protected all the time, and we have the most advanced protections, and we're kept up to date. So I don't honestly think that there is a lot that we could have done to plan for this or had redundant systems, in place. Because if you had a redundant system in the background, it probably was running CrowdStrike as well. And as soon as you brought it online, it would have the blue screen of death too. So,
yeah. So, well, I think I agree with you that I think that this kernel, no kernel debate is going to be really relevant. I think Microsoft is probably going to give us a hint of what they are going to do moving forward. I wouldn't be surprised if they give us the biggest tip on what to expect.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, they definitely are seriously taking a look at how do we also as Microsoft prevent this from happening in the future. And they've kind of let software companies do whatever they wanted within the kernel for quite some time since Windows XP, and now they might start taking some of that control back.
Maybe turn more like Apple. Wouldn't that be
yeah, it could be. Yeah, exactly.
Another follow-up, like a post, a remediation type of question. With all of the outages and all of the dubious repair and recovery efforts that are taking place, with or without MSPs, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we have to assume there's a lot of non-MSP recovery efforts being performed by, let's say, break fix shops that are not
Mm-hmm.
cybersecurity experts. Should we not have some sort of guidance that, I'm just thinking of like just basic network scans after the systems have been up,
Mm-hmm.
recovered, and just making sure nothing was put onto the systems in that vulnerable state. Any thoughts about what we might look for there?
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely, it's not a bad idea to check out once everything is back online. Has anything snuck in while we were so focused on getting back up?
Yeah. No, very very good point. I just can't help but think of how many non-managed systems are out there that were
Mm-hmm.
impacted by this, that
Oh,
were
yeah.
left on their own just to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's crazy actually. So I actually fell into cybersecurity through software development. So started my career off as a software developer, and I was just thinking the other night, one of the best QA analysts that I ever worked with was a guy named Lalit, and Lalit would go in there and he was like, "I broke it," and we said, "How'd you break it?" And he's like, "Well, I pushed this button 20 times until it broke." And I was like, "Well, we're not supposed to do that." And he was like, "But it let me." So, I think for software developers, going forward, we have to think a little bit outside the box of, hey, what if somebody does this? Or, what if my code points to, nowhere? What's going to happen with the computer when my code says go to nowhere?
Yeah, no, I mean so probably gives you a much different perspective on these types of errors, if you want to call it that,
Mm-hmm.
of how they even come about. And I think I'm just struck by how massive and widespread this was, and that there's got to be more than just we're gonna fix how we test updates before we
Yeah.
deploy them. This seems like we've gone far beyond just that issue here.
Yeah, exactly. And, maybe a little bit of the human verification after automated testing occurs just to make sure that, the machine didn't allow something that it shouldn't have been allowed. So I definitely think that there's going to be a lot more stringent testing on software, particularly when it does touch the kernel of the operating systems. So, yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of changes in software development and the testing cycle going forward.
No doubt, and probably a lot of it's probably good.
Mhm.
Good that it happens, and it's hopefully well thought out and reasoned discussion about what changes, if any,
Yeah.
should be advocated for. But I don't think the world would. I don't think the public will receive fond. They didn't receive it fondly this time, but I don't think
Hmm.
they're going to have nearly um, any patience if they had patience before,
Right.
for a second or a third outage like this happening ever again. I mean, like, it seems like
Yeah.
this is raising awareness for all vendors who have that
Hmm.
level of access. Agree? Not agree?
Oh no. Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we talk about how widespread it was 8.5 million Windows computers, but I guess I shouldn't be, but I'm shocked to see that Microsoft says that's only like 1% of their user base. So, but just you see the impact of 1% of the computers going offline caused, uh, Delta Airlines. What are they estimating? 500 million in
500.
losses.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. Um, and I
Yeah.
know
And just
United Airlines had a bunch of cancellations too. So I think we're going to see. I think I did actually see a statistic where it said the estimated worldwide losses are like 5.4 billion or something like that. It's crazy.
yeah. I mean, like, this far surpasses any ransomware heist that we've ever seen so far.
Oh yeah.
I think the largest was maybe that the Kaseya, right, at
Uh,
70 million, like the single isolated ransomware request.
Yeah, actually, there was a new one that just came out that they found. I think it was sometime earlier this year. A $75 million ransom was paid to the Dark Angels group.
Okay, so they
Yeah,
upped it by 5 million.
yeah, yeah.
All right, but I mean, yeah, like this blows that out of the water from a
Hmm.
monetary
Oh yeah,
impact alone.
oh yeah,
Um,
100%. Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, Shannon, thank you very much for coming on. I think we're going to be having you on in the future just to talk
Sure.
about this as we learn more about it and learn about what steps are being taken to remedy this in the future. So I hope you can come back and join us again. But thank you very much for shedding light on some of the more technical aspects of this situation.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, Charles. Appreciate it.